It's the best recruiting rundown ever. Why? Because we said it is. Welcome in, everybody, to the recruiting rundown here on Gamecock Central. Kendall Smith and Wes Mitchell joining you
Two
here
this week.
for episode 1 of the week. We promised you guys we would bring you 2 episodes of the recruiting rundown this week. We are staying true to our word. Wes, what a game this past weekend. I wasn't there. You were. I was literally panicking. I'm not going to lie. I was panicking at multiple points in that game. I was freaking out. I was working another job. I'm trying to keep up with the game at the same time. But lo and behold, South Carolina comes away with the win, a huge win, finally beating Missouri. I feel like we've been waiting on this one for a few years. So you were there, you saw the vibes, you know the atmosphere of Williams-Brice Stadium, and there were a lot of recruits there as well that South Carolina is certainly trying to impress. So vibe check overall, what was it like, Wes, and how do you feel like that atmosphere could impact a recruit's decision?
I mean, Kendall, for these recruits that have been able to come to multiple games this year, they saw a field storming against A&M. They saw game day and probably one of the best just daytime atmospheres I've seen in forever for LSU. You know, Ole Miss atmosphere was good before the game kind of got out of hand. And then on Saturday, another just incredible atmosphere. I would say, honestly, for being, not prisoner of the moment, A&M atmosphere overall, like course of the game, was probably better. But with how loud it was at the end of this game, like in the moments, like when Rocket scored and then when the defense went back out there to get their final stop, probably a couple of the loudest moments of the entire year, maybe the loudest moment of the entire year when Rocket scored. And if you're a recruit, I mean, if you just love football, you saw an incredible football game back and forth at the end, and you got to see Williams-Brice like at its best, at its peak. And that really, I mean, it's been the case all year long. But when we send out these texts or DMs, ask the recruits, like, hey, what'd you think? It's always the atmosphere. Like, if you're listening, like if you're at the game, like you do make a difference. Like it matters. These prospects want to play in front of people who care. They want to play in atmospheres like that. And that was once again, Kendall, the case on Saturday, as Gamecock fans saw. It felt like a moment that just had been so long coming because, like you said, you hadn't beaten Missouri in so long. And how often do you get to see your team drive down the field for a game-winning touchdown with seconds left? Just special all the way around.
Well, I love the fact that the Rocket touchdown registered on the Richter scale as an earthquake. I mean, that just goes to show you right there. The crowd was electric. And I always say this, but whenever it's a big moment for South Carolina, obviously I'm not able to be at the games like I was when I was living in Columbia, but it shows through the TV. South Carolina always looks so good on television. So even if you're a recruit that's not at the game or you decided to go somewhere else for the weekend, I feel like South Carolina really creates that sense of FOMO. Like, wow, I wish I was there. I wish I was at Williams-Brice Stadium to experience that moment. I had the FOMO and I'm not a recruit, but it looked incredible on television. So glad that you felt the same way, obviously being there in person, but a few official visits this past weekend as well. Wes, what feedback did you receive from those guys who came out to take an official visit in Columbia?
Yeah, so as of right now, we're doing this on Monday afternoon. We've got direct feedback from one of the 3 official visitors, and we've got some kind of more indirect feedback that we've gotten just based on where things stand with the other 3 guys. I'll start with the kid that Chris Clark spoke directly with, and that's Kevin P., offensive lineman from Lancaster, South Carolina. Obviously, in-state guy, committed to Georgia Tech currently, got an offer from South Carolina a couple weeks ago, sets up the official visit. I would say right now, feel really, really good about where South Carolina stands here, Kendall. I think he's still committed to Georgia Tech, but I think South Carolina is probably the favorite here. Visit went great. He said as much, and, we're kind of just going to be monitoring that one moving forward before we get to National Signing Day here in a couple of weeks. But Gamecocks have really done a good job there, putting themselves, I believe, in prime position for a flip there. We have not spoken to Mike Tyler directly yet. I'm going to try to get over to Hammond right down the road from me here in Columbia, probably on Tuesday, so be on the lookout for that on Gamecock Central. But really, even going into this visit, I thought South Carolina was maybe the favorite for Mike Tyler. despite being committed to LSU. We'll hear from him directly, like I said, but all the feedback there, very, very positive. I think ultimately when you look at this program, you look at what they're doing, like we talked about, look at the atmosphere, look at the on-field success that they're having this year. Look at what they're doing with Josh Simon, who obviously is a tight end as well. That's going to be a lot in the end, in my opinion, for Mike Tyler to turn down. I think Carolina has done everything in their power to put the pressure on him, in a good way, to make him want to flip to South Carolina. And that's one where I think the Gamecocks are in pretty good shape there as well. The other recruit, Michael Clayton, defensive back from Georgia, who is committed to Rutgers. We don't have direct feedback from him. I don't have quite as much specifically on his recruitment either at this point, but I do believe South Carolina has given him plenty to think about going into the final stage of the recruiting process as well. So you would say in a big picture standpoint, all three guys, Carolina made moves with them. It's just a matter of now that those visits are over, now that kind of the excitement starts to wear off a little bit and it really becomes final decision time, what happens as they get back home and kind of just lock in and make these final decisions. That's what we'll be tracking through these final few weeks on Gamecock Central.
Yeah, and be sure to keep up to date with everything on GamecockCentral.com. As Wes mentioned, we are recording this on a Monday afternoon, so more information to be shared and more that will come your way about this past weekend and the recruits that were in Columbia. Now, not only official visits this past weekend, but some unofficials as well. What kind of feedback have you received from some of those other guys that were there on an unofficial visit?
Yeah, and I would say nobody more important than Jared Smith, the class of 2025 four-star edge who made it in for a visit. And this was something where it was anticipated that he would be on campus. But, of course, high-profile guy like that, you always want to make sure they're going to make it in. He did, had a good time. From what we understand, spent a lot of time with Sterling Lucas, who has been heavily involved. He's been kind of the primary driving force for his recruitment from a South Carolina standpoint. From the very beginning, those guys really like each other a lot. There's a lot of mutual respect between Jared Smith as a player and Sterling Lucas as a coach. And he's really done everything he can, I think, at this point to make Jared Smith reconsider that Auburn commitment. So as it goes down the stretch, you're going to have, in my opinion, South Carolina, Ole Miss, who is trying to flip him as well, and Auburn all jockeying for that final position going into your National Signing Day, early National Signing Day, but I call it National Signing Day now. This is the default one coming up in December in a few weeks. And from what we understand, from what I hear, this is probably going to come 100% down to that final day. Like, I expect a final decision to be then. And I think it could take many twists and turns even between now and then. Important thing to remember, though, Carolina got him on campus. They got one more opportunity to show him what they were all about. And, we'll see. We'll just see where it goes from here. This is why recruiting is fun to follow, because some of them you just don't know what's going to happen to the end. Also, Donovan Murph, who we talked about on the show before, he was the former 2026, now 2025 prospect from Irmo, four-star wide receiver. I did get some feedback from him. He made it back in. He's been to a bunch of games this year. Enjoyed the atmosphere again. Enjoyed watching those wide receivers make plays as a fellow wide receiver himself. And interesting thing to watch with Murph, he will actually be taking a Clemson official visit this weekend. And then last time I asked him after his Carolina OV, he was eyeing that signing day as his decision day as well. So we'll see if that shifts at all or if that's still the case. But obviously for Murph and really all these guys, Kendall, getting to the final steps of the recruiting process if you're a class of 2025 prospect.
Well, it seems like this weekend went about as well as it possibly could have for South Carolina, not only on the field, but of course off of the field as well from a recruiting standpoint. And that's always exciting, right? You get into those big time situations, those big games, and South Carolina's done a really good job of showing up in a lot of those games this year and obviously putting on a show for these recruits as well. And they'll have another opportunity to do that again this weekend against Wofford, their last chance really of the year to get some guys out and get them to a game and have them experience Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia. So big weekend coming up, and we will definitely do another recruiting rundown for you all, as we talked about last week. Our second episode will come up here soon, just a little bit later in the week, when we have more clarity on who's going to come out this weekend for South Carolina's final regular season home game of the year. I feel like the season flew by. I feel like we were just doing the videos about LSU and Old Dominion and just the very beginning of the season, talking about a lot of this recruiting stuff. And now we're sitting here at the end of the season, early signing day. As you mentioned, we basically refer to it as National Signing Day now, because that's when most guys end up signing anyways, is just a couple weeks away too. So it's like really, really getting close. And I don't know about US, but I find that very hard to believe.
Yeah, it goes faster and faster every year, I think, Kendall. And like you said, we'll be talking about end of year. We'll be talking about early signing day very, very soon. We'll be talking about transfer portal being open again. So it's one thing to the next. And by the way, if you haven't been on Gamecock Central, head on over, check it out. We've got feedback. We didn't even talk about a lot of the underclassmen who were there. So if you'd like to just really dive into recruiting, make sure you check that out on GamecockCentral.com. And like Kendall said, later on in the week, we'll have a much better idea of what prospects might be in for this weekend. And I want to reiterate something Beamer talked about yesterday, Kendall. For a lot of these guys who you all followed as recruits, some of them 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, this is going to be senior night for a lot of these players. So an opportunity to see them at Williams-Brice Stadium for the last time. They'll, of course, have senior night festivities before the game. And one of Beamer's messages this week, on Tuesday at his press conference and Thursday at the call-in show, will 100% be about the importance of getting to Willie B, not just being there, but being there a little bit early to show these guys some love for sticking around and either being a part of the program for their entire careers or coming in and just being a huge part of what could be a really special year this year for South Carolina.
Yes, great message, and also very hard to believe that a lot of those guys are graduating already. The time really flies, and we're talking about 2026, 2027, 2028 guys here on this show now. So yeah, when football season ends, which hopefully South Carolina will get into a great bowl game and we'll still be talking for a little while longer. But when it does come to an end, don't worry, because there's still plenty more to talk about in the world of recruiting. It truly never stops. So that's why we've got the recruiting rundown here on Gamecock Central. A huge win for South Carolina over Missouri. They're trying to get some wins off of the field as well in the recruiting world. So thank you all so much, everybody, for joining us on this episode of the Recruiting Rundown. It's part one of a two-part series coming at you this week. We're super excited for part two, so stay tuned for that. But for Wes Mitchell, I'm Kendall Smith. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and have a great week, because South Carolina finally beat Missouri, and we can all be happy about that.